that this, which is an experiment, will go well. And I ask people to bear with us if there are any teething problems. What I've been asked is if all members introduce themselves very briefly. So I'm Councillor Andy Fear. I'm the chairman of the Planning Committee. And if we now go through the people in the room, and when we finish the people in the room, I'll ask the people who are here virtually to introduce themselves briefly as well.
I'm Councillor Marion Reddish. I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Committee and I am a representative of the Thistlebury Ward.
Councillor Burt Proctor of Audley Ward.
Councillor Simon Tagg from Westlands Ward and Leader of the Council.
Councillor Jenny Cooper, Bradwell Ward.
John Williams, Councillor for Crossheath.
John Williams, Councillor for Crossheath.
Mark Holland, I'm substituting chair tonight for Councillor Helena Maxfield.
And if I could now ask councillors who are with us online to introduce themselves briefly.
Councillor Dave Jones, Silverdale Ward.
Councillor Sue Moffat, Audley Ward.
Councillor Paul Northcott, Loggerheads Ward and portfolio holder for planning and growth.
Just wait for a second. I believe Councillor Burgess was around on the system somewhere. Maybe the system has let her down. I'm not sure.
I'm just trying to connect her into the meeting now, Chair.
I think while we're waiting for Councillor Burgess' connection, we should press on with the meeting. Otherwise, we're going to have a long hiatus. So first of all, let's look at item 1, apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Maxfield, for whom Councillor Holland, as he said, is substituting this evening. Are there any further apologies?
No further apologies, Chair.
Thanks very much. Then let's move to item 2 of our agenda, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to make such a declaration this evening? And I take it silence means that that is not the case. So let's progress to item 3 of our agenda, minutes of previous meeting, which have been circulated. Are members content that these are a correct record of our past proceedings?
Happy to move them, Chair.
Happy to second them, Chair.
Could I'll take this as a visual sign. Could I see those who in the room are in favour of the minutes simply raise their hand, and if those on Zoom could press the raise hand button. So those who are present, and again, it's important to note that this is the first meeting of the full committee as opposed to the reduced committee that we've had on virtual things. But those who were present at the virtual meeting are content that this is a correct record, so that item is passed. Let us therefore move to item 4, the first substantive item of our agenda this evening, application for major development, Brookhouse Road, Rosevale Business Park, Chesterton. You see the recommendation in front of you. I'll just ask our officer if there is anyone, any further information on this item.
Apologies. No, there's nothing further to add on item 4. Thank you.
Councillor Tagg.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm willing to move the recommendation on this. I think, as it says there, the extension of time has been agreed with the applicant, and I think obviously this is a development that will bring jobs to the borough. So even though extending time is something we should really consider only when necessary, I believe in this case it is necessary. So I move that we permit the application with those conditions as set out.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments from members before I proceed to a vote? In that case, we'll do a vote. I think the sensible way of doing a vote is a vote by roll call. So if when I call your name, you say whether you're in favour or against the recommendation as printed. Councillor Reddish. Councillor Williams. Councillor Northcott.
4.
Councillor John Williams.
4.
Councillor Proctor.
4.
Councillor Tagg.
4.
Councillor Burgess.
4.
Councillor Jones.
4.
Councillor Cooper.
4.
Councillor Holland.
4.
Councillor Moffat.
4.
That recommendation is therefore clearly approved. Progress to our next application, again for major development, Upper House Farm, Pinfold Lane, Almington. And again, I'll ask our officer if there is anything to update us on this item.
Just no update, Chair. I just wanted to take this opportunity just to correct a minor error in the agenda report. In the section on the impact on character and appearance of the area, on the final paragraph of that section, it says, therefore, it is considered that the proposed development would cause any harm. Well, there's a very small but very important word missing there of not. So it's considered that the proposed development would not cause any harm. So,
thanks very much. I therefore open the item for comment from members, and are there any comments that members wish to make? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on page 19, second paragraph down, public right of way. I'm pleased the officers picked this up and has spoken to the County Council's Highways officer, and the applicant should be signing the diversion. No problem with diversion if it's sensible and allow people to extend their businesses. So just as a rider, just put down to strengthen that point that the applicant does actually put signs up, not necessarily the finger post, but some signs as farmers do with arrows pointing round and away from the danger area when the development's going on and when the development is finished. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's Councillor Tagg wish to speak? No, Councillor Northcott then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This area is known quite well to me. It's in my patch. I can't see a big problem with this, subject to the footpath, which is Councillor Williams has alluded to. I would agree with that. And I'm glad that it's been included as part of this and that the negotiations have taken place with the Staffs County Council. So I'm happy to propose this, subject to the recommendation to permit. I'll say that as laid out in the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Could I just say we've had one comment from our virtual audience, which is saying it's not easy to hear unless you speak directly to the microphone. So if I could urge members in the room to cuddle up to the microphone, so to speak, I think people outside this room will be very grateful. Are there any further comments from members? Councillor Tagg?
Thank you, Chair. Just a second, Councillor Northcott in his recommendation for permit.
Any further comment before I move to a vote? In that case, I'll take the vote by roll call. So, Councillor Reddish.
Permit.
Councillor Williams.
Permit.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit.
Councillor John Williams.
Permit.
Councillor Proctor.
Permit.
Councillor Tagg.
Permit.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit.
Councillor Jones.
Permit.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit.
Councillor Holland.
I'm in favour of the recommendation.
Councillor Moffat.
Permit.
Now, that item is clearly passed. We can proceed to our next item, application for minor development, land between 238 244, the ORME Road. I believe we have a public speaker on this item. So I'd like the public speaker to be brought into the room.
Chair, Mr. Taylor doesn't appear to be in the room, who's the agent, but Mr. Abid is in the waiting room. He's the applicant. I don't know if he wishes to speak.
Could he is entitled to speak on the same terms as the agent. Could you ask him, please, whether he wishes to do so?
Mr. Abid, would you like to speak on this item? Mr. Abid, your microphone was muted. Would you like to speak on this item? Okay, Mr. Abid, I haven't heard any response, so I will assume that you don't want to speak at this moment.
In that case, it appears we do not have a public speaker. I'm just going to ask our officer now if we have any further updates or comments to make on this particular item.
No, Chair, nothing to add.
Thank you very much. So you see the report and recommendation in front of you, and I invite comment from members. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to agree with the recommendation as printed. I am glad that the officers have taken the time to note that the inclusion of an apartment block in this location would be very much out of keeping with the street scene. And I agree with most of what else has been written in the report. I'm only surprised that more people haven't objected to the proposals.
Councillor Reddish.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation for refusal. I am the ward member for this area, so know ORME Road very well. And certainly, I think, had the application before us been for a pair of semi-detached houses, full stop, there might well have been a different recommendation that I could have supported. But I cannot support the second bit, which is a block of apartments. For me, that is a step too far and would very much encroach on neighbours. And for all the reasons in the report, I am moving refusal.
Councillor Tagg.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, second Councillor Reddish on that and support what she said, and also what Councillor Holland said before. I think, as it says in the reasons for refusal over development, I think that's the correct decision on this. So I welcome the refusal.
Yeah.
Councillor Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I agree with everything that's been said. But could you ask a question, really? The developments on land, it was one or two houses built. All the estate was built probably in the 30s, 1930s. They demolished because, I take it, because of the fault that runs underneath as it runs through Nottingham the same. And yet we see development coming on these properties. Are they built in a different way and on different rafts or whatever? Can the officer enlighten me on that?
I don't know the construction techniques involved, but we've consulted with the Coal Authority on this application, as we have with the other applications for residential development along Orme Road. And the Coal Authority has no objections, subject to a condition requiring intrusive site investigation works, which presumably would recommend mitigation measures that could potentially make developments acceptable.
Any further comment from members before I proceed to a vote? In that case, I will progress to a vote. You'll note that the recommendation is one of refusal. So can I see those in, well, I'll ask whether you're in favour of the recommendation, i.e. for refusal or not, which would be permit. Do be mindful of what the recommendation says. Councillor Reddish.
I'm in favour of refusing this application.
So, in other words, for the recommendation as printed.
For the recommendation.
No. Councillor Williams. Councillor Northcott.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Williams.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Proctor.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Tagg.
For the recommendation to refuse.
Councillor Burgess.
For the recommendation to refuse.
Councillor Jones.
For the recommendation to refuse.
Councillor Cooper.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Holland.
For the recommendation as printed.
Councillor Moffat.
For the recommendation.
So that item is therefore clearly refused as per the recommendation printed. Let's progress to item 7 of our agenda, application for minor development, William Riley and Sons, High Street, HALMEREND. And again, before I move to debate, I first of all should note for members that there is a supplementary on this item, and also then ask our officer if there is any further information to convey to us.
Thanks, Chair. No, there's nothing further to add at this time. Thank you.
In that case, again, I open the item. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have to confess I realise how old I am when I realise that I've known this business for 70 plus years. So there we go. This has been a very important business within the area and within the parish of Audley and indeed the surrounding area. But its main function was very much allied to the supply of explosives to the mining industry and supplies to the agricultural industry, particularly the dairy industry around that area, all of which sadly have either disappeared or are in decline. I can well understand that this business has little future in its present form. And indeed, this is the third generation of the family that have run the business. And those who knew the late John Riley will have a smile when I say that they're running out of steam. John was a great old engineer who loved to build steam locomotives. I think that this land is best suited now to the purpose that it's been suggested, and I will have no hesitation in supporting the application, the recommendation as set out with the obvious recommendations contained there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Any more comment from members?
Yes, I have.
Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I second the recommendation. As Councillor Proctor has said, the Riley family have been a significant family for the Audley parish and the ward, very well respected. And I also know that they thought really long and hard. I think the plans that have been put forward and the recommendations by the officers make this a viable development. You know, we welcome new families into the area and opportunities for people to come and be part of the HALMEREND village. We're sad to see the post office go. We're sad to see the business go. But I'm sure that the spirit of the Rileys and the Riley family will continue to play a part in the life of Audley Parish. And I really want to echo what Councillor Proctor said and really wish the Rileys luck and welcome a really well designed development and new families into the area.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said and welcome this development. And as has been said, it's sad to see the family business disappearing. Just to point on the right-of-way that runs squarely round the boundary, and it mentions in the documents that I suppose the company have put a fence up to stop intruders. So the public right-of-way goes squarely round the boundary. But on saying that, just above, there's a footpath that takes you through to the back end and onto Bates Wood and up to Scott A. And also below, there's a footpath that runs through to Bates Wood. So in this case, I mean, whether they'll apply for the closure of that right-of-way as a walk, I think in some cases it is sensible to say to close that off and bring that into the development site. So I'll wait and see what does happen, because I think nobody will use that. I don't think anybody's ever used that path. So let's see what happens, but I hope they do manage to get it closed off and redeveloped properly instead of a silly fence that does nothing at all other than allows undergrowth and whatever. Thank you.
Councillor Burgess.
Yes, I'm just trying to figure out where in ALMINGTON this building is. Is that at the bottom of All Sages Bank? Am I right?
Yep.
That's the one. Right. Right, thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Sorry.
Councillor Moffat, did you wish to speak again?
Yeah, just to respond to Councillor Williams's comments about the footpaths. Actually, all of these paths are really well used, and lots of walks and lots of village members just like to troop around that place. So we will see how it develops, but I think people would be really keen to see all rights of way maintained. There's nothing more rousing to local people to feel like a right of way is being removed. So I'm sure the Riley family will be very considerate about that anyway.
Councillor Proctor wished to make a comment as well, probably on the same matter.
It was Councillor Moffat's quite right. If you want to cause a fight in ALMINGTON, close a path. I suggest we wait and see what comes back, because this path does skirt the boundary of the area that's part of the development. So let's wait and see. But I can imagine a former councillor, Sprosen, who has exercised the last 33 Alsatians that he's had along that path. I'm afraid that it has been in use frequently.
Yes, I'm displaying the plan at the moment. That this is the plan showing the layout as proposed. The footpath on the definitive map, Audley footpath number 66, I think it is, runs on the map down the existing access and through the yard, but it's not there on the ground. I understand it's that highlighted in yellow, and they are showing that that will be retained as part of this development. And there is the opportunity to open it up if that's the path that is referred to, that's enclosed in the fencing, because they're offering some landscaping adjoining it.
Councillor Proctor wishes to make comment, presumably on that diagram.
Yes, indeed. And Councillor Williams is right to raise it, but that path hasn't run down through Riley's yard for donkey's years. The path runs exactly where that yellow path goes, John, right the way on the outside of the fencing. They've got fencing all the way along the boundary of the yard. That's where the fence goes, and I understand that's what they're looking to retain as part of the development.
I think, given the concerns about all of this, I mean, if we just append a note at the end of our proceedings to the developer about concerns regarding the footpath, that it sounds to me as if there's not going to be a problem here, but I think it would be worthwhile just appending a little note about that, given what's been raised by the committee. Councillor Holland, I think, wished to contribute.
Thank you, Chair. The councillors representing Audley have spoken movingly of HALMEREND's heritage, and I'm inclined to support them in approving the application with recommendations as printed. I would just like to give some scrutiny to the matter of encroachment onto the green belt, which is a germane matter to one of the other applications in front of us tonight and is important across the borough. If I can read from the reason for recommendations at the bottom of page 33 in our agenda packs, it is concluded there are very special circumstances which would outweigh any limited harm to the openness of the green belt from this development. It is therefore considered that very special circumstances exist, and it goes on. Am I to understand from the wording that is in that report, in that recommendation, that the view of the officers is that there is a breach of the green belt, but that it is a less severe breach than appeared in a previous version of this application, which would have been slightly more, and we're prepared to accept this limited and specific breach? And if that is the way that we're constructing it, should we say so plainly?
Well, that argument set out in more detail later on in the report under the heading, do very special circumstances exist which would outweigh the harm caused to the openness of the green belt. That and just to illustrate the issue with the green belt, this plan shows the green belts hatched in green, so you can see the access into the site and down this sort of northeastern, southeastern boundary of the site is within the green belt, and plot 8, the outrigger marginally encroaches into the green belt. So the majority of the building sits outside of the green belt. It's only that small single-story outrigger in part that encroaches. The alternative, this was a development initially proposed for 9 dwellings, and there was 3 dwellings that encroached into the green belt. This amendment reduces that encroachment quite considerably. It's a very small encroachment by way of the building. Obviously, the gardens extend into the green belt and the access, but that is not inappropriate development. We're just looking at whether that little bit of the outrigger, which is inappropriate development, is so harmful that the overall development should be refused. And the consideration is it's such a minor impact on the openness of the green belt, and the alternative would be to lose another dwelling, and that is considered to be too much of an ask to make this development acceptable. It's so minor that it's that in itself is the very special circumstances that justify the granting of planned permission in this particular case.
I apologise for putting our officer on the spot, but I do appreciate the reasoning. As it says in the report on page 39, it is a 10 cubic metre encroachment onto the green belt, and I am comfortable with my phrasing, a limited and specific breach. I will be voting in favour, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments before we proceed to a vote? So in that case, you see the recommendation in front of you, and I'll take this as a roll call. Councillor Reddish.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Northcott.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Williams.
For the recommendation.
Recommendation.
Councillor Tagg.
For the recommendation to permit.
Councillor Burgess.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Holland.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Moffat.
For the recommendation.
That item clearly passes. We can progress to our next item, item 8, application for minor development, Peacock Hay Road. And again, I'll just ask our officer if there's any extra information to impart to us at this point.
No, Chair, nothing to add.
In that case, members can see the recommendation in front of us, and I ask for contributions. Councillor Tagg.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, reading the report, obviously, I think it's something which I've been on planning many years, and it's always something we really look at very closely when there's a call for retrospective planning permission for something in the green belt, of course, as well as it says there. But having read this, I think this is obviously a timber structure that is associated with the care home there. So I'm willing to support this and would move the recommendations to permit.
Any further comment from members? Councillor Williams, could I just ask you to knock your mic off?
Sorry.
Councillor Holland.
I would second the recommendation.
If there are no further comments, again, we will proceed to a vote. So I'll ask Councillor Reddish, in favour of the recommendation or against?
For the recommendation.
Councillor Williams.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Northcott.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Williams.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Proctor.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Tagg.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Burgess.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Holland.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Moffat.
For the recommendation.
That item again clearly passes. We'll now move to a series of more information items than decision items. And the first of those is item 9, a report on the 5-year housing land supply. And again, I don't know whether one of our officers wishes to speak to this. Mr. Fleet.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the annual monitoring or housing update on the 5-year land supply that we do. So it's looking back over the previous year's supply of housing. We've looked at the various elements of demand for housing and also the provision of sites coming forward. The summary element of this is that we do have a 5-year land supply. Now, we have provided two figures within the report. One is for the number without student accommodation, and one is a number for with student accommodation. The reason behind the two different figures is that there are different methods of calculation and case law around the value of student numbers to the 5-year land supply. So we have the fallback of the without scenario, which actually provides a 5.1 years supply. And with student accommodation, it goes up to 7.3. So we feel that having scrutinised the figures, the actual elements that comprise housing land supply, we are in a position now where we have that 5-year land supply, which will factor into the determination of planning applications in the future and for future policy work. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleet. I open the item for comment to members. Councillor Northcott, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is vital. Welcome news. I welcome this report. And it shows really the due diligence that this council places on its work in terms of the planning supply and maintaining that across the board. This is important, particularly in the rural areas. My patch is mainly rural areas. In the past, we have been open to inappropriate development in the area because in the past we haven't been able to justify a 5-year land supply. And as a result, the policies of the planning authority at Newcastle were considered out of date, and limited weight was afforded to this. And we've seen take place at least 4 major application areas on my ward. Neighbouring wards has been 2 major ones. And this is a sort of thing that we really want to make sure doesn't happen. And it fits in with our aspirations in terms of the joint local plan. We want to see development in sustainable locations, in appropriate locations, where it can be considered good quality housing for that area and enhance the communities in which it sits. What we don't want to be doing is creating extensions to villages that become ultimately dormitory villages and effectively die because there's no life in them, because everybody else goes out to work during the day and isn't really interested in the cohesiveness of smaller communities. So I'm really happy that we've been able to not just show that we've got this, but we've got a healthy supply. And of course, we can't get complacent with this. We need to make sure that we have a healthy supply over the next few years. And as a result, we're going to have a much better position in able to say where we want our housing to be with the joint local plan. So it's fairly straight, self-explanatory, but it's highly important that we as an authority get to choose where our housing goes and isn't just forced upon us from developers out there just to make a quick buck, really. I mean, I'm not against development per se, who would be, but it's got to be appropriate in the right areas, and having a 5-year land supply will certainly make sure that the rural areas are more protected because they're vulnerable for attack more than others, say. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tagg.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Support everything that Paul said on that. I think, as he's pointed out, we know the downside of not having a 5-year land supply, and Councillor Northcott knows that more than anybody with being a rural ward member. I think, obviously, with the student position, it puts us well over, but even without that, we're over the 5-year supply level at the moment. Of course, it's an ongoing rolling forward plan, isn't it? And we have to be aware that we don't want to leave ourselves open, particularly as we're working on our local plan in the future as well, that we need a 5-year housing supply, as Paul has said, to be able to dictate more where we have the development, where we feel it's needed as part of a plan, rather than speculative developers coming in, which they naturally will do, to try and take advantage of land which we don't consider it to be, and we don't, unfortunately, have a 5-year landing supply to back that up. We do at the moment, and of course I know that Paul, in his position as portfolio holder, will working with the officers to ensure that that is the situation and continues to be the case going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. I too welcome the report, and I think thanks are owed to the portfolio holder and the leader of the council, who are both with us tonight, as well as to the officers who put effort into preparing it, and the very welcome and I hope robust statement that we now have a land supply that exceeds 5 years. I've, in common with some other councillors, believed that our land supply was slightly higher than we were prepared as a borough council to defend for some time. But I'm glad that we have now reached a position where we can say that we have this land supply. I'm slightly sad that students don't appear to count, or their residents don't appear to count, if we have to cope with the applications that come forward for student accommodation. And I'm thinking particularly of the ugliest building inside the Newcastle Town Centre Conservation Zone, the lot that is built on the site of the former Savoy Theatre. They should also count towards our housing total. Students are people too. They are an important part of our local economy. And when we're approving housing, whether that is for students, for long-term residents, for new young families, or for professional people, or even for retirement accommodation, it is important that all of that is factored into account and is taken account of by the government and by the Secretary of State in the form of the Planning Inspectorate when they are determining appeals that come in front of them. So I do hope that we will be able to defend that higher figure and to celebrate the fact that we are meeting our targets and that we are delivering housing for the people in this borough who badly need it. But I look forward to the next version of this report being on time, and I congratulate everyone involved in producing it. Those are my thoughts, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome this report, and thank you for the officers for the hard work that's gone into this report. And it's quite, I would say, easy reading, but you get through the mathematics and that, it is a really good report. But just make the point where I'm really pleased that I've got a 5-year housing land supply, well, 7.5 years now, that we can determine where we develop the land for housing. And I hope the rural area are looking at land in their area to put forward, because everybody's got to take their share, as same as the urban area. And we want to say where we want to have our housing land. And of course, we've got the joint local plan coming up, and there's some very contentious pieces of land in that that we're going to have to fight or agree to go on the local plan. But on saying that, it's a really interesting report, and also on the students, where they move, where they go into student accommodation or stay in family homes. That in my area, Cross Heath, a lot of houses have been taken up by students. Welcome, majority of them, no problem at all. Living and working and hopefully stay in the area once their education is finished. But it's interesting when you surmise that they go into student accommodation or they stay in sharing a family home. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further comments from members on this matter? I don't know if our officer wishes to respond to anything that he's heard this evening. In that case, first of all, what I'd like to say is re-echo what members have said. Thank our officers very much for the hard work put into a very, very important document. And the second thing I'd say to members here this evening is to please do be evangelists for this document. Ask our colleagues on the council to read it and think about it carefully, because it does really affect this borough's future. It's a very important document. So there is no vote to be taken here. I'm assuming everyone here is happy to receive this report. I look around the room and I see nodding heads. I can't see any objections on screen. So once again, with thanks to our officers, we will accept that report. Let's progress to item 10 of our agenda, which is a report on Boggs Cottage, which this committee has asked for. There is a supplementary item, and again, I don't know whether our officers wish to add further information.
Nothing further to add, but I just wanted to highlight the information in the supplementary report. We have received what's called a pre-hearing note from the inspector appointed to deal with the appeal, advising that the planning inspectorate are continuing to postpone physical hearings and inquiries. They don't, this inspector is concerned that a virtual hearing would prejudice parties and doesn't consider it is an appropriate option for this particular appeal, but is considering whether this could be what is described as a blended event, where there may be a combination of physical attendees in one or more locations, as well as a virtual element, and the two elements need not necessarily take place at the same time. But if that's the option that is chosen, then it would not take place on the 6th of October, which is the date that the appeal hearing was scheduled for. I mean, ultimately, it is the planning inspector's decision as to the how the appeal should be held, but the inspector has given the council and other interested parties the opportunity to comment by 5 p.m. tomorrow, on whether we have any strong views as to how the appeal should be determined. It seems difficult to advance a strong case to suggest that a virtual event could be held without prejudicing parties, but a blended event, which would mean that the appeal could be determined a little bit quicker than a physical hearing, may be an appropriate option.
I think Councillor Jones, ward member, wishes to comment on this matter.
So just reading, thank you very much for that. Just reading this supplementary report, it strikes me, as you've mentioned, we have to respond by tomorrow. And I presume that as this is to committee, it's committee that will recommend how we respond to this by 5 p.m. tomorrow. I would move that we recommend that our preference would be for a virtual hearing to take place on the 6th of October. If that is not possible, then we would want a blended hearing in order for this case to be heard as quickly as possible, unless there's recommendation for officers for why that would potentially cause issues.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Officer, got a comment on that?
Well, obviously, planning committee can resolve what the response to the planning inspectorate should be. I just wanted to highlight that if we do what, as a council, seek to persuade the inspector that it should be a virtual event, we'd have to set out an argument as to how that could be held without risk of unfairness to the appellant and or interested parties. That's the concern of the inspectorate. I think the point that stands out to me, particularly in the bullet points where she sets out her concerns, is the one where the appellant is expected to need to liaise with their agent during the proceedings, which will obviously be difficult if they are attending virtually in different locations. Similarly, local residents may wish to confer, but I think it's difficult to argue that there wouldn't be unfairness to the appellant, and on that basis I think the inspector is likely to not, unless we've got convincing argument, to opt for the blended event if we suggest that as something that the council would be prepared to accept.
Councillor Tagg.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I support what the officer's saying there. I think we're here tonight because this council has got concerns about planning via virtual measures. We wanted to bring back the in the room element, and I think that's proven to be a success tonight. And I think I think it is limited what you can do online. I think that sort of conferring between applicants and their agents or their legal advice can't really happen unless you leave the virtual meeting which you're in, which again can't really rejoining could be a problem. There could be IT problems. There could be all sorts of things. So I think I wouldn't want this council to recommend a virtual only route. I think the blend, which we are calling here hybrid approach, could be a successful way of doing it and doing it quickly. Because looking at this report, I mean, I've been off of planning for 6 months. Obviously, with the move to smaller meetings on Zoom, I'm back in now on the full committee. And of course, the last meeting I had, we were looking at a report from Boggs, Cottage, and from DODDLESPOOL. We're still in that situation now, but I'm pleased to see this supplementary. And I think we shouldn't be putting forward things that would obstruct it moving forward. And I think in the correct way, and I think that would be for PINS to do it as a hybrid arrangement. And let's get on with it.
I think what the committee would wish is for this to be resolved as expeditiously as possible. I have less concern, I must confess, about the virtual issues here. This Sunday, in fact, I was involved in a virtual meeting with another meeting on the side, and I simply was on a Zoom link for the main meeting, and I was discussing things with colleagues on a WhatsApp link which was running off the side of it, and I personally saw there was no problem with that at all. Now, the question, it seems to me, in this regard is, were we to say that, would we then run the risk of the inspector saying that they wanted a physical meeting, which would delay the thing substantially? In other words, I think what's before the committee is what is the most sensible approach to speak to the inspector to make sure that this meeting goes ahead as quickly as possible. If we feel that it is going for simply saying we feel that the hybrid with, I'm guessing from what our officer says, a delay from the fixed date of the 6th of October, though not one which will be as long as a physical meeting, is tactically the right thing, is one thing. On the other hand, if we feel that a virtual meeting could be held without prejudice, and again, I don't personally see where that prejudice lies, although I'm happy to take arguments on the other side. We might want to say that, but that I think is the decision that lies before us at this point. Councillor Holland.
Chair, I think that you and Councillor TALKE have expressed a view which is common among certainly the councillors who are physically present tonight, which is that this ought to be dealt with as expeditiously as possible. And in making our comments as a committee, my view is that we should comment in a way that facilitates that goal that we have of seeing this very long running matter finally resolved, or at least further along the road.
So just to ask Councillor Holland, how do you feel we should go about doing that?
I have to confess, Chair, I don't know, but I'm inclined to agree with you when you suggest that you can see no reason why a virtual or hybrid format might not bear fruit. I am not sceptical about the technology. I do believe that the issues that we have in terms of public health and the way in which public meetings of all kinds are going to be held are going to be with us for a significantly long time. And it is right that the Planning Inspectorate, in common with every other public authority, realises that truth.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I can see from what's said here that there's concerns around prejudicing any party. So, and it's mentioning that they don't know about the technical capability to participate. So, if any party doesn't have the ability, the technology to participate, what would that mean in terms of a hybrid event? So, would the person who hasn't got the technology be afforded that in any sort of way? And how exactly would it work? Thank you.
It is the Planning Inspectorate that determine how the appeal should be held, and may set out the appropriate means of that, the technology. I'm not sure I could answer that question without seeking advice from my IT colleagues. The inspector, the blended event anticipates that there will be an element where participants will be there physically. And so I would anticipate the people that may have technological issues will be able to be physically present in some way, shape or form.
Councillor TALKE?
Isn't what we're seeking here is to get this hearing up and running as quickly as possible, isn't it? So I think what we should say is we don't think they should wait to have an all present meeting, because that's going to be, as members have said, a long time away, isn't it, because of the COVID restrictions. Perhaps we should say is that, we wish them to expedite this meeting as soon as possible in the best available terms. Like we're approaching meetings, if we can't have a physical presence, then we have a remote presence. If that is everybody, then that's fine. But I think as Councillor behind me, Councillor Cooper said, there are some people that might want to take part that are not available to get onto technology in any way, not only to talk to their legal advice, but also to actually to get into the meeting to start with. So I think possibly for them, they would have to have the possibility of using in the blended hybrid approach, being in the room to give evidence. So I think we probably don't need to specify which, just get on with it and don't wait for there to be an actual meeting in person for everybody, which could be a long way away because of the restrictions we're in till at least next year.
Yes, this issue of fairness is at the heart of the appeal process. And in their letter to us, the inspectorate have picked up that not all parties will have that technical nous to deal with it. They recognise that, yes, the applicants are the appellants is one of the parties in there, but it's also people like the parish council and making sure that they're able to fully engage with the process. And I'd be regretful if that the inspectorate accelerated the appeal to try and get a timeline hit, but the parish weren't able to properly represent themselves at that. And ultimately the outcome there is one that we're frustrated with because of technical problems that blighted the appeal.
I say from my personal experience, I wouldn't have any worries about the relevant parish council being able to represent themselves virtually. I think the most important thing for this committee is to send a message which says we do not need to wait for an entirely physical meeting. That will kick the ball back into the long grass. It will lead to a lot of frustration for many people. And I think the only question before us at the moment is whether we want to say we feel that it's perfectly possible to have an entirely virtual meeting, not of course that the inspector need listen to us, but at the very least, we feel that this could be held as a hybrid meeting or a blended meeting, depending on the vocabulary that's being used by the relevant people, to keep the process moving. It was very gratifying, I think, that we finally got a date. What I don't want to do is get back to a position where that date recedes to being entirely hypothetical again. Councillor Reddish.
Thank you. I suspect at the end of the day, as has been said, the inspector has the final say in a way as to which mechanism she's going to use. And I don't think she's going to change her mind about a virtual meeting. So I think that I'd like to formally suggest that we do go for a hybrid meeting because it's cutting our losses, it's the lesser of the evils. Because in reality, we don't want to wait forever for a face-to-face. So I think I would suggest, in the knowledge that the inspector probably isn't going to listen to us say we want a virtual, that we do go for this hybrid blended meeting.
Councillor Williams and Councillor Tagg.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a small point. Will the meeting be held here? Will we, before we do any making decisions, where will the meeting be held?
Well, until we know what the blend is, I suppose it's difficult to anticipate. But I think we did book this room for the appeal hearing that was scheduled for the 6th of October. I don't anticipate that some of it would take place here.
With the planning inspector, with the planning inspector here.
I don't know. I don't know exactly what
need,
they mean by a blended event.
Solid...
They don't. It is unclear as to how a blended event would operate. I'm not aware that there is any guidance that the inspectorate have on how that would operate.
Could suggest, I mean, go what Councillor Reddish is saying, but offer this room for everybody to come. This is where we have the meeting. Hopefully, invite the planning inspector, and let's go from this room. And then I'm sure the technology is not a million miles away, is it?
I think we could certainly say in our response that the council will be willing to make facilities available for the meeting. That will be quite a useful thing to do, I think, Councillor. Yes. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think in my original recommendation that I moved was our preference would be for the wholly virtual on the 6th, which I echo your sentiments. If the High Court can hold hearings virtually, then the planning inspectorate can surely hold hearings virtually. But, maybe not the case. However, if the 6 was not deemed to be suitable in the planning inspector's mind, then that we would settle for the hybrid, which is essentially, if I'm getting, that was what I moved and is also what a number of committee members have recommended we do. So I don't know why somebody can just second that and we get straight onto a vote on that. But essentially, what we're saying is we would prefer this to be dealt with as soon as possible, and we have no problem with the virtual meeting. However, we would be willing to compromise for the blended, which seems entirely reasonable, and what we've been discussing for the last 10-15 minutes.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Tagg.
I would second that, but I think the hybrid blended is an improvement on the virtual, so I hold a different view too. But I think what we need to do is not to be so specific in what we get back to them with. Just say, please have the meeting as soon as you can, and also that if it's a blended meeting or it's a fully virtual meeting, we want this to become to happen as soon as possible, really, to expedite it.
So I pick up a degree of frustration here at time. Let's see if we can agree on a form of words on which we can vote. Okay. What I was hearing from Councillor Jones is that the council would have no objection to a virtual hearing, but would not object to a blended or hybrid meeting were the inspector to think that that was a better option. On the other hand, I think we should also say the council does not wish or does not feel it appropriate for further delays to be put down and this to be an entirely physical meeting. That this can be managed by either a virtual or a blended process.
Agree with the wording, Chair.
Would members be, if I formally propose that and Councillor Jones seconds that, can we proceed to a vote on that form of wording? So in that case, I'll go through our voting procedure again. So Councillor Reddish.
Hesitated because I actually...
Continue.
Sorry, can you use the mic, please, because we can't hear.
What I was saying is that I have, my view is that we should go for a blended and the virtual being the second option. So for that reason, I'm going to be against it.
Councillor Williams.
I think I've listened to everybody. I think I'll go with the majority, Chair. Sorry, but I'm for a meeting of anything just to sort it all out then. Let me put it to you that way then.
Councillor Northcott.
I'm for any meeting that will be flexible enough to accommodate the inspectorate.
I take that as being for. I think we do need to have for or against. I mean, it is a vote.
For, Chair.
Councillor Williams.
For, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Proctor.
For.
Councillor Tagg.
For.
Councillor Burgess.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Holland.
Jackie Trent was born in this loyal and ancient borough, and she wrote the words to the Neighbours theme tune. With a little understanding, you can find the perfect blend. For, Chair.
Thank you for that interesting piece of information, Councillor. Councillor Moffat.
I would have loved to have heard that sung. However, we'll just say that I'm for.
Thank you, Councillor. I personally am rather glad it wasn't sung, but that's a different matter. By my count, that means that motion is passed. One thing before we move on, again, I've asked this of the committee in previous occasions. I'm assuming this committee would like a report to come back on this, not at the next meeting, but at the following meeting.
Yes, Chair.
So I look around the room, I see lots of nodding heads, so I'm going to take that is the case by acclamation. Let us move to item 11, land at Doddlespool, Betley. Again, I'll just ask our officer if there are any further updates.
No, Chair, thanks.
Councillor Tagg.
Yeah, and move this. I think it's, I just want to ask, is the site meeting going to be blended or virtual? That's supposed to be a joke. After the debate we last had. No, I think it's great that obviously that site meeting is going to take place on the 28th of September. And I think obviously shows that we keep an eye on it. I would suggest we also bring this back in the 3-month period as well. Sorry for the joke.
So I was going to put the point. So I noticed members nodded. So once again, in 2 meetings' time, we would like an update on this item. Yep. Let's then progress to item 12, residential development on the former Silverdale Collery. Once again, I'll ask our officer if there are any further updates.
No, I think that we're about to initiate some dialogue between the developer and the parish council to try and progress this, but I haven't got anything by way of an update I can give you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks very much again. We've been having this revisited. Would members like an updated report in 2 meetings' time? So again, if we could have that back on the agenda at the relevant period. That brings us to item 13, update on breaches of planning obligations. And again, I look to our officers to speak to this briefly.
There's no updates to be provided. It's as set out in the report. We still need to make progress on these matters.
And I invite comment from members. Councillor Tagg.
I move that we note the information, Chair.
Are members content that the report be received?
Agreed.
In that case, let's progress to item 14, quarterly report on extensions to S106 agreements. And again, I'll just ask our officer if there are any updates to be had for this report.
I am aware on the application at 1, Compound C and Compound D in Limedale Cross, that an extension to the date by which the Section 106 agreement should be completed has been extended by agreement until the 18th of September. So very imminent that deadline will have passed.
Thank you very much. Again, I invite comment from members. Councillor Tagg.
We should just note 3 there on the Baptist Church and the final paragraph, I think, to note that the obligation was not completed by the 28th of August due to a delay in council and the new guidance completion. It's now required officers to consult with the legal section and update the planning committee in the future. I think we'd welcome that update.
So again, with that caveat, are members content that this report be received?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
That brings us to item 15, final item on our agenda of urgent business as defined by the relevant section of the relevant act. I know of none. I look to our officers who shake their heads, so they know of none either. That means we can bring the meeting to a close. I think as an experiment, it's gone reasonably well. I'd like to thank members and our officers and the ones behind the scenes for making this possible. And wish those of you who are at home to have a pleasant rest of the evening and everyone else a safe journey home.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.